Sarah's biggest fear comes true, featuring camping with the cows. Sarah grew up in a quiet suburb just a few miles away from Melbourne's bustling city centre. She had always been a bit of an oddball compared to the other kids in her neighborhood, but there was one thing in particular that set her apart: her intense hatred of cows. Let's roll this story back to 1843, before Sarah moved to Queensland. She's old, but she's not that old. It all started when Sarah was just a little girl. Her family had taken her on a day trip to a nearby farm, where she had a traumatic encounter with a group of cows. She had been feeding them when one of them suddenly lunged at her, causing her to fall and scrape her knee. Ever since then, she had been terrified of the animals. As Sarah grew up, her fear of cows only intensified. She would go out of her way to avoid them, even if it meant taking a longer route home from school or missing out on social events where cows might be present. Her friends and family would often tease her about her irrational fear, but Sarah could never shake the feeling of unease she felt around cows. Even the sight or sound of them would send chills down her spine. Despite her aversion to cows, Sarah was an adventurous spirit at heart. She loved hiking, camping, and exploring the great outdoors. But she always made sure to avoid any areas where cows might be grazing. Little did Sarah know that her fear of cows would one day lead to her untimely demise. Here's the story about Sarah's family camping trip many centuries ago. Sarah had always loved camping, but the one thing she couldn't stand was cows. Unfortunately, her family didn't seem to take this phobia seriously and decided to go on a camping trip near a farm. As they set up their tents, Sarah couldn't shake the feeling that they were being watched. That night, Sarah went to bed early, exhausted from the day's activities. But as she drifted off to sleep, she heard a rustling sound outside her tent. At first, she dismissed it as the wind, but then she heard a snort. It sounded like a cow was right outside her tent. Sarah tried to ignore it, but then she heard more snorts and shuffling. She peeked out of her tent and saw a group of cows staring back at her with their soulless eyes. They were slowly approaching her tent, and Sarah felt a sense of dread rush over her. Suddenly, the cows began to growl and snarl, their eyes turning red as they charged at her tent. Sarah screamed and tried to scramble out of her tent, but the cows were already upon her. She could feel their hot breath on her face as they trampled her tent and dragged her away into the darkness. The next morning, Sarah's family awoke to a scene of chaos. Their tents were torn to shreds, and Sarah was nowhere to be found. All that remained were hoof prints and a sickening stench of cow dung. As they searched for her, they found her lifeless body, covered in deep cuts and bruises. It was clear that the cows had attacked her in a frenzy, and Sarah's worst nightmare had become a reality. From that day on, Sarah's family never went camping again, and the memory of the vicious cow attack haunted them forever. The incident shook the family to the core, and they could never explain why the cows had acted so aggressively. Some speculated that the cows had been infected with some sort of disease, while others believed that the farm had been cursed. But Sarah's death was not the end of the horror. The family soon discovered that they were being followed by the same pack of cows. They would hear their snorts and growls at night, and occasionally catch glimpses of them in the shadows. It didn't matter where they went. The cows were always there, watching them with their eerie red eyes. The family became increasingly paranoid and fearful, never knowing when the cows would attack again. As the years passed, the family slowly fell apart. They were haunted by the memories of that fateful camping trip and the relentless stalking of the cows. They never found peace, and eventually, they too succumbed to the curse of the cows. Legend has it that the same pack of cows still roams the countryside, looking for their next victim. Some say that they are possessed by the spirits of the farmers who once owned them, seeking revenge for their mistreatment. Whatever the reason, the cows remain a source of terror for those who dare to venture into the woods at night. So, whenever you ever think of going for a camping trip, consider your location carefully, as it could be your last. Watch out for cows. Peace.